The receptionist didn't know the man standing in front of her was the billionaire CEO, who held her company's future in his hands. With a cold stare, she told him to get lost. Minutes later, her entire empire began to collapse. Marcus Carter, a black billionaire CEO whose name carried weight across the business world, walked into the towering glass building of Whitfield Corporation with a quiet confidence. Unlike other billionaires who arrived in convoys of luxury cars and entourages, Marcus believed in simplicity. That morning, he wore a sharp but modest dark suit, carried a slim leather briefcase, and entered alone, intending to discuss a $400 million partnership that could rescue Whitfield's collapsing empire. The lobby was vast, with marble floors, golden lights, and employees moving briskly, but the moment Marcus approached the reception desk, the atmosphere shifted. The receptionist, a young woman with a sharp tone, gave him a quick glance, her eyes traveling from his skin to his plain suit, and instantly her expression hardened. Instead of the warm professionalism expected in such a place, she leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. "You must be lost," she said coldly. Marcus replied calmly, "I'm here to meet with Mr. Whitfield regarding today's meeting." She smirked, shaking her head as if he had spoken nonsense. "People like you don't just walk in here. Get lost before I call security." Her voice carried across the polished lobby, and several heads turned to watch. For a brief second, silence hung heavy in the air. The insult stung not because Marcus was unused to disrespect, but because it came from ignorance so casual, so careless. Yet instead of anger, Marcus's face remained composed. He had endured moments like this before, moments when people saw his skin before his success. Without another word, he gave her a steady look, turned around, and walked calmly out of the building. No one in that lobby knew that with those few dismissive words, the receptionist had just sealed the fate of an empire. Upstairs in the grand boardroom of Whitfield Corporation, the atmosphere was tense. A long mahogany table stretched across the room, surrounded by executives in expensive suits who checked their watches nervously. Their company was sinking fast. Stocks had been dropping for months, investors were restless, and creditors were circling. The only lifeline left was Marcus Carter, the billionaire CEO who had agreed to discuss a $400 million partnership that could save them. They whispered among themselves, wondering why he hadn't arrived yet, while their chairman, Richard Whitfield, tapped his pen impatiently against the table. Downstairs, however, their receptionist was still bragging about how she had handled some stranger who tried to walk in. She laughed with her colleagues, describing Marcus as out of place and probably a nobody. Her co-workers chuckled nervously, not brave enough to correct her. What she didn't know was that the man she had dismissed was the very person. The entire company was waiting for upstairs, the only man powerful enough to rescue them from disaster. When Marcus's assistant called Richard Whitfield later that afternoon to inform him that the deal was off, the room went silent. "What do you mean he's not coming?" Richard demanded, his voice rising. The assistant explained calmly, "Your receptionist told him to leave. Mr. Carter doesn't tolerate disrespect." The executives sat frozen, realization spreading across their faces. They had underestimated the value of kindness and overestimated their own untouchable status. Instead of sending someone to apologize, they dismissed the matter, convinced Marcus would return out of necessity. What they didn't realize was that Marcus Carter never chased after anyone he built empires of his own, and if they couldn't see his worth, then they weren't worth saving. Their ignorance had just signed the first page of their downfall. That night, Marcus Carter sat in his office at the top of his skyscraper, the city lights stretching endlessly beyond the glass walls. His desk was spotless, his mind sharp, but his heart carried the weight of what had happened earlier. He wasn't a man easily shaken, after all. He had built his billion-dollar empire from scratch, fighting against prejudice, rejection, and countless doors slammed in his face. Yet the receptionist's words echoed in his memory, "Get lost." It wasn't the insult itself that cut deep, but the reminder of how often he had been underestimated simply because of the color of his skin. Marcus leaned back in his chair, hands clasped together, and thought carefully. He had come prepared to save the Whitfield Corporation, not because he needed them, but because he believed in opportunities that could create jobs and stability for others. But now he saw things differently. If a company's foundation was built on arrogance and ignorance, how could it truly stand? His phone buzzed with messages from his legal team, waiting for his instructions. Marcus's decision came swiftly, like steel slicing through silence. He called his attorney and spoke with calm finality. Cancel every agreement, withdraw every offer. They will not get a second chance. The words carried no anger, only truth. For Marcus, this wasn't about revenge, it was about respect. He had spent years proving that power was not defined by wealth alone, but by dignity, integrity, and wisdom. Closing his laptop, Marcus stood by the window, watching the city pulse with life. Somewhere across town, the Whitfields were celebrating, still convinced they were untouchable. They had no idea the lifeline they were counting on had just been cut. Their fate was sealed, and Marcus Carter had made his decision. The fall of Whitfield Corporation began quietly, like cracks spreading through glass before it shatters. Within 24 hours of Marcus Carter's decision, whispers reached Wall Street that the billionaire had pulled out of the $400 million deal. Investors, already nervous, panicked. By the second day, the company's stock price dipped so fast that trading was briefly halted. Board members rushed into emergency meetings, but the damage was beyond repair. Longtime partners, once loyal, withdrew their contracts, unwilling to stand with a sinking ship. Banks froze credit lines, suppliers refused deliveries, and employees fearing layoffs started resigning in waves. Down in the same gleaming lobby where Marcus had been told to get lost, the atmosphere had transformed into chaos. Workers carried boxes of personal belongings. Security guards escorted executives out, and the receptionist who once smirked with arrogance now sat frozen at her desk, pale with fear. She overheard coworkers whispering the truth that the stranger she had mocked was Marcus Carter himself, the man whose presence could have saved them all. Each headline in the news told the story with brutal clarity. Whitfield Corporation collapses after losing billionaire investment. Richard Whitfield, red-faced and desperate, made frantic calls to Marcus, but they went unanswered. By the end of the week, the once mighty empire had crumbled into dust. Its headquarters a hollow reminder of pride gone unchecked. Outside, the public watched in shock as one of the city's wealthiest families lost everything in record time. For the employees left jobless, it was a tragedy. For the Whitfields, it was humiliation. And for Marcus, it was nothing more than the natural consequence of disrespect. The empire had fallen, not by his hand alone, but by the arrogance that blinded them to the value of a man they had pushed away. Weeks later, the Whitfield Corporation's once towering headquarters stood like an empty shell in the heart of the city. The golden lights that once shined proudly through its glass walls were gone, replaced by darkness and silence. Dust gathered on the marble floors of the lobby where arrogance had spoken too loudly, and the receptionist's chair sat abandoned, a reminder of a single careless moment. Marcus Carter happened to drive by one evening, his black car slowing as he looked up at the lifeless building. He felt no gloating satisfaction, no burning desire for revenge, only a quiet confirmation of the truth he had always lived by. Respect costs nothing, but the lack of it can destroy everything. He stepped out of his car for a moment, standing across the street, hands in his pockets as memories of his own struggles came back. How many times doors had been slammed in his face, how often people judged him before knowing him. But he had turned those rejections into fuel, rising higher than anyone ever believed possible. Now, the Whitfields had been given a chance, and they had thrown it away with arrogance. Somewhere Marcus knew that receptionist was sitting jobless, replaying her words, realizing too late that her disrespect had sparked the beginning of an empire's end. Without bitterness, Marcus returned to his car, his empire still strong, his legacy intact. As the city lights reflected on the glass ruins of Whitfield Corporation, he whispered to himself, "Power is not in wealth, it's in dignity." Then he drove away, leaving behind a broken empire and a timeless lesson. Never underestimate the worth of a person, for respect withheld today may cost you everything tomorrow.